The night my father announced that my sister would inherit everything, the house in Greenwich, the lake property in Vermont, the $9 million portfolio our grandfather had built over 50 years. I was standing near the back of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched. Nobody looked at me. That wasn't unusual. I had learned a long time ago that I was the kind of daughter people look through, not at. I was the one who drove my grandmother to her dialysis appointments every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 years. I was the one who called my parents every Sunday, who remembered birthdays, who sent flowers when our neighbor lost her husband. I was also, according to my father, the one we never had to worry about. He said it like it was a compliment. It wasn't. What he meant was that I didn't require investment. I wasn't going places worth funding. My sister Claire was going places. Claire had graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown, earned her MBA from Wharton, and by 29 was a vice president at a private equity firm in Manhattan. My parents had paid for every year of it, the prep school, the study abroad semesters, the apartment in the city while she interned, the wardrobe that made her look the part before she was the part. They had given her a foundation, because they believed she would build something on top of it. I had become a hospice nurse. My father's exact words, the first time I told him, were, "That's very noble, Mara. Very you." He turned back to his newspaper. My mother pressed her lips together the way she did when she was deciding whether something was worth a response. She decided it wasn't. I had been working with dying patients for 6 years, by the night of Claire's engagement party. I had held the hands of strangers in their final hours. I had called families in the middle of the night to tell them the person they loved most in the world had just taken their last breath. I had learned more about the human heart, the real one, not the metaphor, than any boardroom ever could. None of this registered as success in my family's vocabulary. Success had a salary figure attached to it. Success wore a certain kind of shoe. The party was held in my parents' home in Greenwich, the one with the white columns and the circular driveway, and the garden my mother spent more time tending than she ever spent on me. There were 60 people in that living room. Claire's fiancé Nathan stood beside her in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My parents glowed. This was the life they had built. This was the image they had curated. I had driven 2 hours from Philadelphia, where I lived and worked. I had changed out of my scrubs in a gas station bathroom and put on the nicest dress I owned, a navy wrap dress I'd bought on sale 2 years ago. My mother had looked me up and down when I arrived and said, "You look tired, sweetheart." She had already turned away before I could answer. My father clinked his glass at 8 o'clock. The room settled. He gave a speech about legacy, about what it meant to build something worth leaving behind, about how proud he was to see Claire standing there, accomplished and radiant, ready to take everything the family had worked for and multiply it. He spoke for 11 minutes. I counted because there was nothing else to do with my hands. Then he said it. "Your mother and I have made a decision that we've been discussing for some time. The Greenwich house, the Vermont property, the investment accounts, all of it. Everything we've built will pass to Claire." Applause. I watched 60 people smile and raise their glasses. I watched my sister cover her mouth with both hands like she was surprised, though I noticed her eyes weren't surprised at all. I watched my father beam with the particular satisfaction of a man who had arranged everything exactly as he intended. Nobody looked at the back of the room. I set my sparkling water down on a side table and walked to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror for a long moment. I didn't cry. I had stopped expecting anything different years ago, which is both a kind of freedom and a kind of grief at the same time. I splashed cold water on my wrists. I thought about Mrs. Calloway, my patient that week, 81 years old, who had told me the day before that the only thing she regretted was not telling the people she loved exactly what she thought of them while she still had time. I thought, I'm 31 years old. I am running out of time in a different way than Mrs. Calloway, but I am running out of it all the same. When I came back out, my mother was waiting near the hallway. "Don't make a scene," she said quietly. I hadn't said a single word. "I'm not going to make a scene," I told her. "Your father worked very hard on this decision. Claire understands the business world. She understands what it takes to manage assets of this complexity. This was a practical decision, not a— She paused. Not a comment on you. It's fine, I said. She relaxed slightly, which told me everything I needed to know about what she had been bracing for. She had been expecting me to fight. The fact that I didn't fight was not, to her, a sign that I was dignified. It was a confirmation that I didn't have enough at stake to bother. You've always been so easygoing, she said, touching my arm briefly. That's one of your best qualities. She walked back toward the party. I thought, that is not a compliment. 2 weeks after the party, my father called me. He didn't call often. When he did, it was because he needed something specific. This time, he needed my signature. It's a formalization document, he said. Standard estate planning. The attorneys need all beneficiaries to formally acknowledge the arrangement. It just makes everything cleaner on the legal side. I was in my car in the hospital parking lot. I had just finished a 12-hour shift. I had not eaten since 6 that morning. My father explained, in the patient but slightly clipped tone he used when he was explaining something he considered simple, that the document would officially remove me from any claim on the estate so that the title transfers could proceed without complication. You want me to sign away my inheritance, I said. You're formalizing an arrangement we've already discussed. We've never discussed it. You announced it. There was a pause. Mara, I'm not saying I won't sign it. I'm saying we've never had a conversation about it. I didn't realize this was going to be emotional. I thought. Of course you didn't. You have never once considered what I might be feeling. I told him I would think about it. He told me the attorneys needed the paperwork within 3 weeks. He said he hoped we could handle this in a way that didn't create tension for the family. By family, he meant Claire and my mother and himself. By tension, he meant any inconvenience to them. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after the call. The parking lot was mostly empty. A cold November rain was ticking against the windshield. I thought about the math of what he was asking. My grandfather had grown that estate from almost nothing, a hardware business he started at 24 that he expanded and sold, and then reinvested over decades. He had never been flashy about it. He had worn the same style of flannel shirt my entire childhood. He had taught me to drive a stick shift in a grocery store parking lot when I was 14. He had called me every year on my birthday without fail, until he passed, 6 years ago. And he had never once said a word to me about what I did or didn't do for a living. My grandmother had died earlier that year, in March. I had been with her. Not because I was the nurse. Because I was the granddaughter who showed up. I did not sign the document. The call started 5 days later. First my father, then my mother, then Claire. My mother was gentle and sad. She said she had hoped I was mature enough to handle this gracefully. She said that these decisions were about protecting the family's assets from legal complications, not about love. She said she loved me very much. She said she hoped I understood. My father was businesslike. He itemized the reasons. He reminded me that I had never shown interest in the family's financial legacy. He said that Claire was positioned to steward the assets in a way that would honor what his own parents had built. He did not ask me a single question about my life, my work, or whether I was okay. Claire was something else entirely. She called me on a Wednesday evening. I was making dinner, a simple pasta, the kind you make when you've been on your feet for 10 hours, and the idea of chopping anything more complicated than garlic feels impossible. She asked how I was. She asked about work. She talked for 4 minutes about Nathan's new apartment, a detail I had not requested. And then, seamlessly, she shifted. I just think it would be easier for everyone, she said, if we didn't let lawyers drag this out. Dad is getting older. The last thing he needs is stress. I'm not creating stress, I said. I'm thinking, what is there to think about? You've never been interested in what? In the money side of things. That's not a criticism. You've always been more. She searched for the word. More service-oriented. I set down my wooden spoon. Claire, I said, do you actually believe that I don't deserve anything from Grandpa and Grandma's estate? Genuinely? A pause. I think, she said carefully, that you've made choices that reflect your priorities, and those are wonderful choices. Truly. But this family built something, and it makes sense for it to stay with someone who's going to what? Grow it. I thought about my grandmother on the Tuesday morning of her last dialysis session. She had been too tired to go inside right away. We had sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, and she had told me about meeting my grandfather, how he had been so nervous on their first date that he'd knocked a glass of water into his own lap. She had laughed telling it, a real laugh, the kind that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. I had laughed with her. Neither Claire nor my parents had been there. They were busy growing things. I need more time, I told Claire. She sighed. Mara, I need more time. The conversation ended shortly after that. What I did not tell anyone, what I had told no one, what I had been sitting with since March, was that my grandmother, in her final weeks, had said something to me. She had been lucid and quiet and very deliberate, the way she always was when she meant something precisely. She had looked at me from her bed and said, "There are things being arranged, Mara. Don't sign anything until you hear from Henry." Henry Alcott was my grandmother's personal attorney. I had met him once. At my grandfather's funeral. He had a gray mustache and small, steady hands, and he had given me his card at the reception without explaining why. I had put it in my wallet and not thrown it away, the way you don't throw away a thing you don't fully understand yet. When I got home from the call with Claire, I took out my wallet and looked at the card. I did not call him yet. The 3 weeks my father had given me were running out. He sent a formal follow-up email. Claire texted twice. My mother called and said, gently, that she was concerned about my mental state and wanted to know if I was getting enough sleep. I had not been getting enough sleep. I had a patient in the final stages of congestive heart failure, and another whose family was fracturing in real time over whether to pursue further treatment. I was sleeping 4 and 5 hours. I was eating badly. I was showing up every single day and doing the work. On the last day of the 3 weeks, my parents invited me to the Greenwich house. I drove up on a Saturday morning. The house looked the same as always. The white columns, the garden, bare now in November, the driveway with my father's Lexus and Claire's BMW. I sat in my car for a moment. I thought about what I was walking into. I thought about my grandmother's voice, steady and precise. Don't sign anything until you hear from Henry. I had not heard from Henry. Inside, the table had been set nicely. My mother had made a breakfast I suspected was intended to soften the atmosphere: good coffee, pastries from the French place downtown, a small vase of flowers in the center. My father sat at the head of the table. Claire and Nathan were there. Nathan gave me a polite, slightly uncomfortable smile. He was a decent man, I had always thought. He had married into something he didn't entirely understand. My father slid the envelope across the table before the coffee had been poured. "We'd like to get this settled today," he said. Not unkindly. Just as a statement of fact. The way he managed everything, as a logistical reality to be organized. I looked at the envelope. I did not pick it up. "I'd like to ask a question first," I said. "Of course," my mother said too quickly. "Did Grandma ever talk to either of you about her wishes for the estate?" Silence. My father's expression shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible. Almost. "Your grandmother and I discussed the estate planning at length," he said. "She was fully supportive of the arrangement. Did she tell you that directly?" "Mara." His voice had an edge now. "I'm asking a sincere question. Did she tell you directly, in her own words, that she was fully supportive?" "This is not productive," Claire said. "I'm sitting here being asked to sign away my inheritance at my parents' breakfast table," I said. "I'm going to ask the questions I need to ask." Nathan looked at his coffee cup. My father said, "Your grandmother had full confidence in the plan we laid out." I noticed he had not answered the question I actually asked. I said, "I'm going to need a little more time." My father set down his coffee cup. "We gave you 3 weeks. I understand that. The attorneys have been waiting. I understand that too. I'm not signing today." The room went very still. This was the thing my family had never understood about me. They had mistaken my quietness for passivity for so long that they had forgotten I was a person who dealt with death and fear and impossible choices on a weekly basis. I was not a passive person. I was a contained one. There is a difference. My father looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression he reserved for things that were not behaving the way they were supposed to. A plumbing problem. A difficult vendor. Now, his younger daughter. "I'll be in touch," I said. I stood up. I folded my napkin and put it on the table. I thanked my mother for the breakfast, genuinely, because the pastries had been good and she had made the effort, and some things can be true at the same time. I nodded at Nathan. I did not look at Claire. I drove back to Philadelphia in a silence so complete it felt like a physical thing. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table and I took out Henry Alcott's business card and I called the number. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Whitfield," he said, as if he had been expecting me. "I've been wondering when you'd call." His name was Henry Alcott, and he had been my grandmother's attorney for 22 years. He explained, in the careful, measured tones of someone who had been sitting on something significant for 8 months and had been legally constrained from acting sooner, that my grandmother had come to him in January, 2 months before she died, and that she had made certain arrangements independent of my father's estate planning. My grandmother had assets my father didn't know about, not because she had hidden them deceptively, because she had never seen the need to discuss them with him. My grandfather had left her a separate account, money he had set aside from the earliest years of the business, accounts he had never folded into the main portfolio my father managed. The sum had grown quietly for decades. My grandmother had added to it occasionally from her own sources, proceeds from the sale of her childhood home in Ohio when her mother passed, a small inheritance of her own. Henry had managed it at her direction, entirely separate from the family's financial structure, for as long as he had known her. She had left it to me. Not a portion. Not a consideration alongside a larger gift to Claire. All of it. The total, with current valuations, was a little over $4 million. She had also left me a letter. Henry read it to me over the phone because she had specified he should, if I called before receiving it in the mail. It was 3 paragraphs. In the first paragraph, she told me she had watched me my entire life, and that she knew exactly what I was and what I was worth, and that no one else's opinion of those things would ever change what she knew to be true. In the second paragraph, she told me she had seen how I showed up for her husband in his final years, for her in her final months, and that nobody should go unrewarded for giving that kind of love to another person. In the third paragraph, she said, "I know your father will ask you to sign things. By the time you call Henry, you will know what to do." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after the call. I thought about every Tuesday and Thursday in that hospital parking lot. I thought about the flannel shirts and the stick shift lesson and the birthday calls. I thought about the dialysis center waiting room, where I had spent more hours than I could count, reading paperback mysteries while my grandmother rested, bringing her the specific brand of peppermint tea she liked from the vending machine, learning to do crossword puzzles, because she liked a companion while she did them. I had not been doing those things for a reward. But I was not going to pretend, sitting at my kitchen table that Saturday, that it didn't matter. It mattered. It mattered enormously. Not because of the money, though the money was real and significant, and would change the concrete shape of my life. It mattered because someone had seen me. The person who had known me the longest and the most honestly had looked at my life and said, "This counts. You count." I called my father on Sunday morning. I did not tell him about the letter, or about Henry Alcott, or about the $4 million. I told him, calmly, and without dramatics, that I was not going to sign the document. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mara, I really hoped we could avoid this." "Avoid what?" "Making this difficult." "I'm not making anything difficult. I'm declining to sign a legal document. That's my right." "Your grandmother. What about her?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Nothing. I'll have the attorneys reach out directly." I said, "That's fine." He hung up. Claire called 40 minutes later. She was no longer warm. She said that I was being selfish and that this was typical of the way I had always operated, lurking on the edges of the family, not participating, not contributing, and then trying to claim something I hadn't earned, she said. And I want to be precise here because I have replayed it many times since, that I had always taken the easy road. That caring for sick people was admirable but not ambitious. That I had made my peace with being ordinary. And now I was trying to punish the family for accepting what I myself had chosen. I let her finish. Then I said, I think you should call Henry Alcott. Who? Grandma's attorney. Silence. Why would I call him? Because, I said, I think there are things about the estate that you and Dad were not aware of. I think you should find out what they are before anyone says anything else about what I've or haven't earned. I hung up. I want to be honest about what happened next, because the version I might want to tell, the clean, cathartic version where justice arrives and everyone acknowledges it openly, is not exactly what happened, and I think the truth is more important than a satisfying story. My father called Henry Alcott. There were conversations I was not party to. There were, according to Henry, some heated exchanges. My father had not known about the separate accounts. My mother had not known. This was not my grandmother hiding something from her son in malice. She simply had money that was hers, from before the marriage and from her own inheritance, and she had done with it as she quietly chose. It was entirely legal. It had always been entirely legal. Henry had documentation going back decades. Claire called me 8 days after our last conversation. She was not warm and she was not cold. She was careful. She said that she had spoken with the attorneys, and that she understood there were assets outside the estate structure her father had been managing. She said she wanted me to know that she hoped I didn't think this changed anything between us as sisters. I thought about that for a moment. I think a lot of things changed, I said. I think they changed a long time ago, and we've both just been pretending they didn't. Mara, I don't want to fight with you, Claire. I genuinely don't. But I'm also not going to perform a closeness that doesn't exist because it's more comfortable for everyone. She didn't know what to do with that. We ended the call without resolving anything, because some things cannot be resolved in a single conversation, and I am old enough to know that now. My father never explicitly apologized. What he did was call me, 3 weeks later, and ask about my work in that slightly stilted way of a person who is trying to show interest in something they've previously dismissed. He asked what my week had been like. I told him, briefly, about a patient. He listened. He said, "That sounds hard." I said it was. We talked for 12 minutes, which was longer than most of our phone calls in the previous decade. I did not take that as resolution. I took it as a beginning, or maybe more accurately, as the first real sentence of a conversation we should have started years ago. What comes after it, I don't yet know. I am not closing a door, but I am also not swinging it wide open and pretending the wall was never there. My mother called the week after that. She cried. She said she had not always been fair to me, that she had gotten caught up in the excitement of Claire's trajectory, that she had confused ambition with worth for a long time, and she was sorry. It was the most honest thing she had said to me in years. I told her I heard her. I told her I appreciated her saying it. I told her that I needed some time, that rebuilding something that's been quietly chipping away for 30 years doesn't happen in one phone call, and that I hoped she understood. She said she understood. I think she genuinely tried. With the $4 million, I did a few things in the first year. I paid off my student loans. I put a down payment on a small house in the neighborhood near my hospital, a neighborhood I loved and had thought was out of reach. I set aside a portion for a foundation I had been turning over in my mind for a long time, a fund for hospice care in communities that couldn't access it, something my grandmother would have understood without needing it. Explained to her. I hired Henry Alcott to manage the rest. He seemed pleased. I still work the same hours. I still come home with the weight of other people's endings in my chest. That specific gravity that I have learned is not something to push away but something to carry carefully. I still drive to the dialysis center sometimes, out of habit, out of some cellular memory of Tuesday mornings, and I sit in the parking lot for a minute before I remember that I don't need to go inside anymore. In the spring, I found a box in my grandmother's handwriting on my doorstep. Henry had been holding it per her instructions, waiting for the estate matters to settle. Inside was the set of crossword puzzle books we used to work through together in the waiting room. Inside was also a photograph I had never seen my grandmother and me in the parking lot of the dialysis center, taken by someone through a car window. We were laughing. I was holding a cup of tea. She was mid-sentence about something, her hand raised the way it always was when she was making a point. Underneath the photograph, in her precise, unhurried handwriting, "This is what I built." I have the photograph on my kitchen table now, next to the window where the light comes in strongest in the morning. I look at it while I drink my coffee before early shifts, in the blue hour before the rest of the world starts up, and I think about what it means to be seen by the right person at the right time, how a single person's clear-eyed recognition can hold you together through years of being looked through, looked past, looked over, how some inheritances don't have a dollar figure, how some do. And there is no shame in that either. How the woman who raised my father somehow also raised, from a distance, the part of me that knew to wait, that knew not to sign, that knew, even before I could articulate it, that my grandmother had been watching, and that being watched by someone who truly loves you means nothing is ever as lost as it seems. I am 31 years old. I go to work. I hold the hands of strangers who are leaving. I come home. I lock my door. I sit in my house that is mine, and I think about what my grandmother knew that no one else in my family was paying enough attention to understand. The quietest people in the room, she used to say, are just the ones who learn to save their words for when they matter. I think I finally know what she meant.